Welcome to the What Are Emotions and Can They Save Us podcast. G'day, I'm Marcus Lovett, producer and host of the documentary What Ate My Mum and Will It Eat Me? And this is the health podcast that goes beyond the environment, beyond our diet and exercise, and goes deep inside to explore the effect emotions have on our health. Today I'm talking with Ronald DeSousa. He is an emeritus professor at the Department of Philosophy of the University of Toronto, and is best known for his work in philosophy of emotions. He is a member of the International Society for Research in Emotion and has authored several books including Emotional Truth and most recently, Love, a very short introduction. He thinks differently and I love it. G'day Ronnie from Toronto, Canada.
I watched your video, very interesting. You're obviously, I like your attitude.
Thank you.
Though I cannot aspire to emulate any of your physical feats.
No, that's all right. That's some of us went to the education and some of us just played around and had a good time.
I think I do some of that too.
How did you get into all this? Like, how did you get into philosophy in the first place? What drew you towards it?
Well, I think as a child, I define philosophy as intellectual neoteny. Neoteny is that biological phenomenon that is a prolongation of childhood. So biologists say that the human species is a neotenous species, which means that we have extraordinarily long childhoods compared to other species. Other species might grow up to their full adult state in something like, maybe less than 10% or 5% of their lifespan, whereas it takes us about a quarter of our life to grow up.
Or for some a little bit longer.
Yeah, for some longer. But that's the whole point. You see, a philosopher is one who never grows up, because I think philosophy is an essentially childish thing. And because it consists in asking why and wanting to know, what lies behind things. So I think we've all been philosophers. It just gets drummed out of people in school, and because people say, don't ask silly questions. So I suppose that I had a natural inclination to persist. And I remember I wrote an essay in school in Switzerland, which my teacher said, well, this is what you wrote is philosophy. You should go into the French program as opposed to the Swiss, because the French have a philosophy year in their last year of high school. And so I did that, and then I went to Oxford, and as an undergraduate, I did something called Greats, although I didn't have enough Latin and Greek, so I did a sort of abbreviated form of it, which involved philosophy. And I then went to I then thought I was obviously not fit for real life, and so I went to America. And so I sort of applied for a few things and discovered I was in something called a PhD program, which I really didn't know what it was. And one thing led to another.
The PhD program, though, was that specializing on emotion?
No. I did my PhD work on philosophy of language. I did a thesis called Categories, Translation, and Linguistic Theory, nothing to do with emotions. And then I got more and more interested in psychology, and I was interested in a little bit of everything. And the thing about emotions, what's interesting about emotions is they involve absolutely every aspect of philosophy. And so my other definition of philosophy is that it's a license to be a dilettante. And emotions are the best topic for that, because you have to think about language, you have to think about the psychology of it, you have to think about you think ethics, aesthetics, it's all involved. And so emotion is a sort of alibi for always poaching on other people's fields. And that's pretty much the way I view it. It means I can think about anything I like.
So when did you when was like the emotion specialty come into it then?
Well, I'm not quite sure how I was specifically led to it, because I was in the first few years after my PhD, I got interested in belief, and I wrote a piece called "How to Give a Piece of Your Mind," which was about the difference between believing and assenting and how they relate. And gradually, I can't really remember how I started thinking about the rationality of emotions, and I wrote an article of that name in 1980. And then about 4 years later, this developed into a book, which was my first book that was published in '87, called The Rationality of Emotions. So that it was an offshoot of my interest in rationality, actually. And I've always thought of the philosophy of emotions in particular, but of philosophy in general, as actually something that is a way of life. It's a way of thinking about how you want to live, and it's a way of trying to live in a more rational way on the basis of what you think about life.
So, is this as opposed to religion?
In a way, philosophy and religion are connected in that they both deal with very general issues, but in another way, they're exact opposites of one another, because philosophy is committed to rationality and religion is committed to faith, which is, as I think it was Mark Twain who said, faith is believing when you know ain't true. And the whole point of faith is that you stick with a belief regardless of the evidence or reason. And the whole point of philosophy is you abandon any belief that won't stand up to reason or evidence.
Do you find that your own, not just beliefs, but your own, what you've learned and stuff like that changes all the time? Like, have you been, now that, you've been around it for so many years, are you hanging on to beliefs that you had when you were in your 20s, or are you totally thinking differently?
Well, that's interesting because in a way, I think in many ways, I have to admit that I'm thinking now exactly like the way I was thinking when I was 16, particularly about issues that have preoccupied me recently and in my latest book, which is about love. And so the beliefs, the convictions that I had when I was 16, convictions about the absurdity of the ideal of monogamy, for example, rather centrally, I now have worked through many more ways of thinking about it and many more reasons to endorse those beliefs. But in other ways, of course, my beliefs have evolved and changed, but I wouldn't say change all the time. Maybe they do change all the time, but not in some sort of, I've never had a conversion. I've never had a radical change in my attitude to life. So what philosophy tries to do is to just get things a little bit clearer. And sometimes it leads to changes, and sometimes it leads to consolidation.
What is your definition of emotions?
Well, that's a tough one. I think I don't have anything very unconventional to say about emotions. Most philosophers and psychologists think of them as well. Let me try and in a way start from the beginning. I think emotions are a way that a very complicated mentality is able to deal with the world in a way that transcends mere reflective or reactive responses, so that they begin in something that looks a little bit like a tropism. The simplest organism, the unicellular organisms, have tropisms. It means that they go towards light or away from light. They go towards the greater or the lower concentration of a certain chemical, and that's how they respond to the world. But our life is too complicated. And so emotions arise as a way of complicating our programs for responding. So I think that the most basic emotions, such as fear or a joy or sadness, etc., are ways in which we construe the world. They're ways in which we see the world, which imply certain preferences for agency of one kind or another. If you're afraid of something, you're inclined to run away. If you're angry, you're inclined to attack, etc. And then so I think in that sense, our emotions are shared with other mammals and perhaps even beyond that, but certainly with other close relatives of ours, like other primates. But then where it gets complicated is where language is introduced into our processing of emotions. So when language gets involved, then we have a cognitive aspect of emotions. And a lot of philosophers reacted against the psychologists of the early 20th century, and they're, say, springing from William James's view of emotions as somehow simply perceptions of your body's responses to the world. Famously, William James said, "We don't cry because we're sad because we cry." I'm sure you've heard that. And what he meant was that our consciousness of emotions, our awareness, is really an awareness of the state of our body, and the responses are automatic, and then we perceive those responses and we interpret those as emotions. Now, I think it's actually more complicated than that, because, and that's one of the things that's interesting about emotions, is that they straddle both the ways in which if you like, the ways in which our minds work, which I call the two-track mind. Some people call it the dual processing theory of reasoning. The best source for this nowadays is Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. This is a book in which the research that he did several decades ago with Amos Tversky has become reinterpreted in terms of the idea that our minds work in one sense that they call intuitive, in another sense that you can call analytic. And these are two different ways in which we process information. The intuitive is very fast. You might call it instinctive, though it's not instinct. It can come from learning just as much as instinct. But it's like the sort of thing we call an instinctive response. It means it's very fast, it's usually very efficient, but it gets things wrong. The analytic is what we get typically from language. We work things out, and we work things out in terms of sentences and in terms of reasoning. And that's very slow, and it's very laborious, and it's highly conscious, whereas the intuitive works mostly unconsciously or below the level of consciousness.
And you're saying emotions are intuitive?
I'm saying emotions are interesting because they straddle both. They begin as intuitive, but they can be modified, affected, regestalted by language. So that's why we reason about emotions. But we're not all that good at modifying our emotions in the light of reason. So that's the problem that we have, practically.
So emotions, we're born with them.
Well, in a sense, we are. We're born with the capacities which we share with other primates, as I said, but we elaborate on them, and I think it's hugely important how we elaborate on them. So, for example, if you take the topic of monogamy and jealousy and so on, I think one of the latest article I've written, which is going to a book of articles on sex and love, is about the conversion of jealousy to compersion. Now, compersion, do you know that word?
No.
It's a word. It was a word that was invented to refer to the joy that you feel or can feel when your lover is experiencing pleasure with somebody else. When you think about it, and the way we define love as wanting the other person's pleasure and happiness, compersion ought to be your reaction. If your lover is in the arms of somebody else that makes her happy, you should be happy because she's happy. And if you can just re-gestalt, if you can just sort of view the situation in that light, you might find that what begins as an aversive response, something that is extremely disagreeable, you get pain from the fact that your lover is in the arms of another person, you think, no, I should be getting pleasure from that because I love her and I love the thought that she is actually enjoying herself. Now, you see, that to my mind requires a bit of a twist in the way in which we view things, because we're so much imbued with the ideology of monogamy, of possession of the other person, you're mine, etc., that our natural response in the culture that we're brought up in is, oh, I don't want you to see anybody else. I want your pleasure, but only when I cause it. I don't want you to have pleasure if anybody else is causing it. But that's inconsistent with our general view of love as a genuine preoccupation with the happiness of the other person. So that's an example.
So monogamy is not really natural to us as humans. Is this something that's religion has done to control, society, or is it? Where does monogamy come from?
That's a very good question. And I think it does in part come from religion. One rather cynical theory is that it comes from the fact that when the Christians, but it can't be entirely true because the Romans and the Greeks had a kind of monogamy, but they didn't have it only applied to women really, and men could do whatever they liked, right? So part of built into monogamy was always the double standards. But for the church, if you were monogamous, then you were quite likely to die without any heirs, because women died in childbirth and children died, most of the time before they reached adulthood. So when you died intestate, the church could seize your property. So that's one of the ways in which the church got so incredibly fabulously rich. Now, I'm not sure that is historically a real explanation, but that's one cynical explanation. But not all cultures have monogamy. In my book, I allude to a couple of peoples of cultures where there is either no marriage at all, or if there is, that there is a sense that the children belong to the whole village, and the more men are involved in procreating the child, the more men get interested in bringing up the child. And so they all regard themselves as fathers who have contributed with their semen to some of the strengths and virtues of the offspring in question. Now, biologically, of course, that isn't correct. You're not the offspring of all the men who fertilize a woman, because only one, usually, it's extremely exceptional to have a case where two men have fertilized the same woman at the same time. But it just shows that what really matters here is the way that you consider the situation, the way you construe it. And of course, it's very obvious that monogamy doesn't work in practice, right? I don't know whether this is splashed to the shores of Australia, but in North America, there's this huge scandal at the moment about the hacking of a site called Ashley Madison, the motto of which is "Have an affair. Life is short. Have an affair." And
it's huge in Australia too. Yes, we heard about it.
And I think it's a wonderful example of the absurdity of the expectations of monogamy, right? Because if you just recognize the simple fact that we have sexual desires that are completely separable from our love and attachment commitments, then people would be open about it, and people would have open relationships, then then none of this would happen. None of this would be a scandal. It would be just normal. You may well be committed to one or perhaps more than one person as a life partner, as a principal, maybe partner in the education and the bringing up of children and so on. And then, your sex life would be partly implicated with that person, but in the nature of our sexual desires that after quite a short period, not exceeding about 3 years, you start wanting maybe to have some variety.
Yeah, it's funny. While I was skiing in Verbier in the 80s, I remember meeting a guy from Hawaii who talked about polymonogamy. And it
Yeah,
was about having a principal partner and then a whole bunch of other
that's right. Polyamory.
partners.
Polyamory is what people usually call that now. And there is certainly a growing community of polyamorous people.
Yeah, I wonder if it would be for me. But anyway, we digress.
Yes.
Um, Getting back to emotions. So all those people have emotions as well. Um, what effect, like, because where are emotions in our body? Are
Everywhere.
they in our mind? They're everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. See, that's one of the things about emotions is that they are totally embodied. That they are. You can think of some of your thoughts as it were just being in your mind. You can think of some of your beliefs as maybe just being in your mind in the sense that they don't have any direct effect on the state of your body, not just on the conscious part of your nervous system that's housed in the cortex, if you like, whereas emotions are housed in all parts of the brain, and particularly the limbic system, but they're also in the rest of your body, so that that's why you can perceive emotional responses to some extent by taking people's galvanic skin responses. That's just essentially just means how much they're sweating, or their heartbeat, um, or the tense condition of some of their muscles, and so on. Or, people can just get nauseated by some thought, which is an emotional response. So emotions are totally embodied. And that's one of the reasons why they're so difficult to manipulate and change just by thinking.
So it doesn't like originate in the brain and then go to my heart pumping. It could be my heart pumping because I've already seen something in my peripheral vision.
Exactly, exactly.
So then they must have a huge effect on my health.
Totally,
And
absolutely.
how much research is being done in this? I mean, you're one of the member of the International Society for Research in Emotion.
Yes.
Are you exploring the effects on health, like your physical health, that
Yes,
emotions are doing?
some people are definitely concerned with that sort of thing. Yeah. And I mean, it's well known in psychosomatic medicine that there are physical conditions that both cause and are the result of emotional responses. So it's very difficult to disentangle the causes and the effects because they are, in some sense, one and the same. So I think that your idea that our emotions can influence our health is completely correct. The question exactly how and exactly to what extent. I mean, as you said I watched with great interest your video, and I think that what you said there sounds entirely right, which is that it's not true that your general attitude to life can cause or prevent cancer, but it is true that your attitude to your current life could make it a little more likely or a little less likely that you'll overcome this or other diseases. Cancer is probably not a very good example because I think probably cancer is one of the things that is least affected by your emotions. But if you think about some of the other examples that you gave in terms of the effects of exercise, exercise is well known to be extremely important in the regulation of your emotional life. And so through exercise, you could be affecting your emotional life, which in turn is affecting your general health.
So to have like healthy emotions, I mean, what do you like, exercise for your body, but also to keep your emotions intact? What would be a good regime?
Well, I suppose
You know, like,
I'm something of a maverick in thinking that to some extent are what I call regestalting, which is just viewing things in a different light, trying to take another person's perspective, trying to see things from another point of view. In particular,
empathy.
yeah, empathy, but also humor, laughter. That's tremendously important, I think, to be able to see the funny side of things even when things are going badly. That is a gift, but it's something that perhaps if you have the basic gift of a sense of humor, which not everybody has, you can you can see things as funny. I mean, I'm sure you describe your mother as somebody who laughed a lot, and that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. To people who laugh a lot, I think very much people who are liable to get a hell of a lot more out of life. And
But how would we cultivate people to laugh at a bad situation? Like, so if their life's not going too well and they're finding it hard or they're feeling it guilty to
right.
laugh.
Well, you can think of some writers who are able to exploit that. I mean, I'm thinking, for example, of Proust and the way that Proust is able to describe things in ways that are very, very funny. Although, of course, his sentences are so long, many people don't see how funny it is. but but you can see you know people who can tell stories of disasters in a way that makes them hilarious, and those people usually are approached by their friends who say, "You're so lucky, funny things are always happening to you." But of course that's completely backwards, because the funniness is in the way they construe the situation, the way they see it. And
I,
yeah, can we
I,
cultivate this? I don't know. I hope one can. People can. I think it. Unfortunately, I think quite a lot of that is genetic. Is how you're built. People are born able to see the funny side of things, or they're born only seeing the tragic side of things.
but it's funny. Like, we have, you do exercise to keep your body fit. You eat properly. You avoid toxins.
Hmm.
But there's none of this education on emotions. And like, I had an upbringing, and my older sister, I saw my upbringing as the Cunninghams from Happy Days. It was just like, it was all good and it was all great, and
Uh-huh.
I have all these great memories. But my older sister didn't like it. She thought it was terrible and thought it
Uh,
was, and I, because she was the older sister and I was the younger, the younger
uh-huh.
sibling. I
Uh-huh.
don't know, but it was funny. We had the same life, but she had a different perception on it than I did, and so I was thinking, and consequently, she did die of cancer not that long ago. But
Well, I
how do
don't.
we?
I'll question you consequently.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to say consequently, but she has
Yeah.
died, and I
Right.
wonder
Right.
if that
Right.
has
Right.
anything to do with it.
No, no, one can wonder. But I think probably, as I was saying, in the case of cancer, I don't know. I think I'm rather skeptical of the extent to which those things can be connected. But it's so difficult to know, because after all, if both are due to your genetic constitution, then it's even harder to tell whether they're related. I mean, they could both be independent of each other and yet both be innate, or they could be innate and somehow linked. And it'd be very difficult to figure that out.
Yeah, I guess nature against nurture for your
Yeah,
emotions.
yeah, yeah.
Do you meditate or do anything like that, or has meditation shown to help emotions and create balance?
I did for a while practice a kind of meditation that was popular in California called transcendental meditation, which wasn't really transcendental. It was, what I liked about it was that it was purely a sort of a technique, and you didn't really have to believe in any of the stuff that was sometimes associated with it. And I think meditation, there's lots of evidence that meditation is a good thing. I have to say that in the last 20 years or so, I haven't really practiced meditation. I sometimes think I should take it up again, but maybe my life is too busy and too generally happy to make me feel the need for it. So yes, I mean, my answer is objectively, I think there's lots of evidence that meditation is a very, very good way of controlling your general emotional dispositions. But I personally have not, in recent decades, I have not really been practicing it systematically.
Obviously, you have a happy disposition.
I do, yes, I do. I have a gloomy view of the world. I have an extremely gloomy view of the world, but my emotions are unable to keep up with it. So I am. I always say that I am pathologically cheerful.
So there is nothing that you do to. It's just because that's the way you are. You're not thinking, oh, I've. It's funny. I've just started a family, and I've got a 3-year-old.
Ah,
It drives me nuts, and I've never been like an angry person. I've been always a passionate person, but man, I find myself yelling at him, and I'm just like, where did that come from?
oh, interesting. Yeah.
And I'm blaming my son for cultivating my anger.
Oh, not good. Yeah, right. Well,
No, it's not good. I mean,
I've
oh,
been
go on.
lucky. I've been lucky in that way as well as others. I had a very late child who is now just 18 and entering university. A girl who, when I look back, although I was very, very involved with her, I, I, I cannot, I cannot really remember her causing any trouble.
I wonder as he gets older, maybe I won't remember either. There was just times that I go, I just don't.
Right,
I,
right.
I didn't believe anyone could
Well,
do that to
I
me.
think you should. I think that the main thing to remember, and I think perhaps if you have a child when you're somewhat older, you've seen so many fads come and go about what you should do, what you shouldn't do, that my attitude was really, if you try really hard, you can fuck them up, but you can't really determine all that much about your children. If you just treat them in a basically loving way and do what common sense would dictate and let them be, then they'll be themselves. And that's a way of thinking about it that might also help, because if they're having a tantrum and you think, oh, I've got to deal with this immediately, I've got to somehow do something, then you'll get as upset as the baby does. Whereas if you just say, okay, maybe we'll go for a walk and see and let her cry, and it'll settle down after a while, unless there's something physically wrong, and of course then you need to know what it
Well,
is.
exactly. I mean, but it is funny because, like, a lot of the time I can do that. I can just water off
Right,
a duck's back. It's no
right,
problem. But there's sometimes it'd be like, tapping, and I guess maybe I'm trying to get things organized, and then it's just like he's constantly doing it, bang and bang. Stop that! Stop that! Stop that! And they don't stop it, and they keep going harder and harder and harder.
right,
And
right.
it just push me. But yes, I'm learning to breathe.
Yeah.
And I felt, like I guess in the very early days, I felt I was having a hard time. So I started meditating, and I found meditating calmed those bits a little bit more.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm sure that is very helpful. Yeah.
How to cultivate good emotions, but you don't think there is a way of cultivating good emotions, like a practice that you can do or anything or healthy emotions. It's just like you all got them, you're stuck with them, and that's it. So,
No, no.
oh,
I mean, that's what I say. That's what I'm saying about construal, and so it's partly environmental in the sense that the ideology that is all around you. For example, is there an ideology that says, um, when you confront somebody, when you confront somebody and you have some sort of conflict, you have to be a man. You have to be manly. You have to stand up for yourself. Well, then you're going to feel not only that this is what you're feeling, and I'm right to feel that. This is what I'm supposed to be feeling. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. Whereas if you are brought up in an ideology that says, now, you wait a minute, try and understand the other person's point of view. Try and empathize. Then you'll think, oh, okay, let's see, maybe I can see this from your point of view, and that's going to affect the way I'm going to respond. And I think that's where I think that philosophy is a very practical discipline. To me, although most of my colleagues would disagree with this, but that the ancient tradition of philosophy was very much about this. It was very much about how to live a better life and how to master your emotions. But mastering is perhaps the wrong metaphor, because you can't do it by just exercising your will. You have to do it by, if you like, by tricking your mind into seeing things in a different way. And imagination, maybe literature, imagination has an enormous role to play here in trying to see things in a different light. That's what I would say is your best bet in cultivating your emotions. There are also, of course, things that you can do, exercises that especially children can do, that have to do with maybe learning to be patient. There's the famous marshmallow experiment. You know about the marshmallow experiment?
No, please go
Well,
on.
some people, I'm afraid I can't, I mean, I could send you the reference where I can find, but off the top of my head, I can't remember the names of the experimenters. Essentially what they did is they took 5-year-olds or 4-year-olds, and they said, here's a marshmallow. And now, if I'm going to have to go out for a few minutes, but if you just keep the marshmallow until I come back, I'll give you another marshmallow. But if you eat it before I come back, then you can't have another one. And then they sorted the children out into those that were able to be patient and those who were not. And then they looked at the same children at the age of 16, and they found that their success in school in those tests that they have in America, I forget what they're called, for school leaving age and entrance to university, they found that the correlation between those who were able to wait and those who weren't, the correlation between their test scores was higher than the correlation with IQ. In other words, it made more difference whether you were able to resist temptation for 10 minutes at the age of 5 made more difference to your academic success at 16 than did your IQ. Now, that's an astounding result, and it means that cultivating the ability to wait, the ability to delay gratification, that is something that can be done. And of course, that too is partly a matter of how you think about it. Because if you think to yourself, wait a minute, I'd really like to have that extra marshmallow. So what do I need to do? Well, I need to think about other things and stop concentrating on how much I want to eat it now. So let's think about other things. And that's a way of controlling your attention. And by controlling your attention, you control indirectly the emotions that the things you're attending to will provoke in yourself. And in this way, you're going to be able, to a certain extent, to control your emotions. So I would sum this up by saying it's all in how you think as well as how other people think, because of course it's very difficult to think to yourself, well, I'm not going to go along with the way that everybody else thinks I should respond. I'm going to respond in my own way. That's totally different. That's not easy to do. Social pressure is huge.
The simple act of waiting, so they distracting themselves, so they're not constantly thinking about it, or they could be constantly thinking about it, but hold off not eating it. I mean, like one of the tricks.
Yeah. So that brings up the question of willpower. And what is willpower? Personally, I don't really believe in willpower, but there is some evidence that there's something like willpower can be identified. And there's a guy called Baumeister who's done some fascinating work on this that suggests that if you if you exercise your will in the way in which you grit your teeth and you make an effort, it tires you out in a certain way that makes you then unable to make further decisions. And very often you eat a bit of sugar and it restores your capacity to will in that way. But I think most of what we do is not about willing, it's about arranging yourself to want the things that you really want. And you do that by looking at them in the right way.
And dreaming about them.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, exactly.
What can we do to cultivate healthy emotions?
Yeah.
And will having healthy emotions give us a better life? Not necessarily longer lasting, but like a better quality of life.
Yes, well, I think in a way the answer that I've been giving is
Yeah.
a very traditional one. It is that um, it is difficult but not impossible to not completely control, but to manipulate yourself into having better emotions by thinking about what is at stake, thinking about how you're construing a situation, the many ways in which many human interactions can be viewed from different points of view. And all of that, I think, is going to change the way you respond at the level of your body, at the level of your action tendencies. This is an expression that many psychologists used. Your action tendency is one of the components of an emotion. And so if you change the way you view things, you'll modify your action tendency. And that's one of the ways in which traditionally philosophy, as construed by the Greeks or the Romans, can change your life.
So, I mean, obviously we've got to let our emotions flow, as we've talked about, but using conscious thought to block your emotions, so not letting yourself feel grief or anger.
Well, there's two ways of doing that, you see, and I think that one of them might be harmful and the other might be helpful. There's a sort of urban legend that you have to let your anger out, or else if you block it, it will poison you. And it seems that the actual experiments and actual inquiry by psychologists into this has found this to be completely wrong. That people who repress their anger do not, in fact, suffer from this. They actually benefit from it. So repressing emotions that we used to think of as thinking of as negative is not a bad thing. But I would say that it's more important to think about the world in a different way and not try and repress your emotions just by an act of will, by gritting your teeth. Gritting your teeth might not be all that effective, even though if your emotions are of the kind that lead you to treat other people badly, then letting them out is a really bad thing. It's not a good thing, and it doesn't do you any good. I think that the kind of horrible sentiments we keep reading on the web about people trolling and insulting each other to the point of making people commit suicide, etc., etc. All this horrible stuff is perhaps partly a result of people thinking, it's good for me to express the way I feel. And I think the results of that are very negative. But that doesn't mean that we can't have some positive influence on our emotions, partly by repressing our inclinations to lash out at people, and partly by trying to see the world in a different way, as I keep saying.
Yeah.
So that would be the way I'd sum it up.
Well, and then getting back to, as you said, literature, to read about that.
Yeah.
Oh, well, Ronald, thank you so much for giving your time up this morning.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed the conversation very much, and I'm very glad to know you.
You have been listening to a What Are Emotions and Can They Save Us podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and I would like to thank my guests, for this would not be possible without the generous sharing of their time and knowledge. To discover more about emotions and their importance, you can go to the website whatatemymum.com, or you can follow me on Twitter at whatatemymum, or like my Facebook page, What Ate My Mum, or simply Google What Ate My Mum. Until next time, keep the spirit.